Prologue, 10 years ago. The young boy ran for his life. As he did, he thought back to the simpler times. For instance, last night, when he'd been so bored that he let his mom talk him into watching her favorite TV show with her. It was a locally produced cooking show, and not a good one, chiefly because the chef was terrible. He kept burning the sausages, and if there was one thing the boy hated, it was burnt sausages. Just as he had been about to ask his mom's permission to ring up the TV station and demand that the chef be fired, or at least instructed to use butter instead of margarine, the boy's father entered the room to remind him that he needed to get along to bed so he'd be ready for his big day tomorrow. Big? For whom, the boy wondered. Certainly not for him, as he'd been there, done that, and didn't fancy doing it again. It being the ridiculous tradition in which he had been and was about to be a participant. Take your child to work day. His father was a lawyer. Well, a barrister, which is his country's way of saying basically the same thing. Regardless, what it meant was that the boy would be visiting the same building, seeing many of the same people, and experiencing the same endless boredom he'd fought to stay awake through last year. 12 months ago, when just a lad of 7, he'd sat in the back of the courtroom listening to, or pretending to, the grown-ups arguing over something or other. Scattered throughout the back rows of uncomfortable bench seating, half a dozen other unlikely schoolchildren had sat wearing glazed looks. These kids, no doubt, had had the same kind of internal debate. Join their father or mother at work for the day, or spend it at school. Either way, it was no day at the beach, unless, of course, your parent was a surfer, in which case it would have been exactly a day at the beach. Ultimately, the boy in question had decided to join his father because 1. Summer vacation was still 5 months away and he'd already had enough of school. 2. His mom suspected his father was secretly eating onion rings for lunch despite his New Year's resolution to give them up and had asked her son to find out. And 3. Because he knew it meant a lot to his father that he spend the day with him. None of these reasons, however, had stopped the boredom from swooping in and kicking him between the legs. Therefore, after again sitting on the hard bench for far too long, he'd felt all kinds of relief when some poor sod had pulled the fire alarm, an act which sent kids leaping from their benches with a joy he'd not seen since the school board had outlawed fish sticks in the school cafeteria. Finally, they all had a reason to stand, run around, and even yell without getting in trouble. Thus it was that in a matter of seconds our boy had been the only person under the age of 10 left in the courtroom. He'd remained behind because he'd noticed and had been struck by the adults' reactions. Surely they'd all heard a fire alarm before and knew the drill. Proceed in a quick yet calm and orderly manner to the nearest exit. Then find an exterior exit and exit through it. Simple as the pies his mom loved to bake. However, he'd seen in the eyes of each and every adult in the courtroom not a hint of calm, yet alone orderliness. Instead, he'd witnessed genuine fear, the kind brought about by truly terrible circumstances, which, being only 8, he'd never experienced. But something was clearly wrong, very wrong. Maybe the noise that continued to pierce the air and his eardrums wasn't a fire alarm. Maybe it signified something else, something more dangerous. "Stop right there," a voice had yelled from outside the courtroom. Screams, footsteps thundering up and down the hallways, and the unmistakable sound of shattering glass had followed the shout. The boy had looked around, worry growing by the second, and caught sight of his father frantically motioning him to hurry up and get out. Now! And so he ran. Ran for what, judging by the look on his father's face, he feared might be his life. This brings us up to the present, and to the word pandemonium. It had been extra credit on his last vocabulary test, but it also perfectly described the scene in the courthouse lobby that he raced out into. People were running in literally every direction. The intensity and volume of screaming surpassed that of an audience watching the scariest movie ever. To make matters far worse, immediately upon entering the lobby, his eyes started to sting like he'd just dumped an entire bottle of shampoo in them. A green fog hovered over the far end of the hallway that he suspected was the source of this newfound pain. The logical move was to run as far away from the fog as quickly as he could. So why, when he looked down at his feet, did he see them running towards it? While trying to guess the answer, he looked around and noticed several shattered windows had left shards of broken glass shattered everywhere his feet were taking him. People passed him running the other way, looking wild, red-eyed, and teary. In addition to the glass, debris, papers, spilled drinks, and boxed lunches littered the floor. It kind of looked like his bedroom, a place he wondered if he'd ever see again, especially if he couldn't get his stupid feet to do what seemed obvious and turn around. Of course, sometimes the obvious is the right thing. Sometimes it isn't. And sometimes doing what seems to be the wrong thing turns out to be the right thing. As his feet drew him closer and closer to the green fog, the boy hoped like crazy that this was one of those rare times. Oddly enough, almost as soon as the boy entered the fog, he was on the other side of it. He glanced back and saw it was more of a wall of fog. Weird. Looking ahead, he saw 2 police officers giving chase to a masked figure, and they were coming right at him at breakneck speed. Fight or flight? He glanced down at his feet, wondering how they would answer the question. This time they did nothing. Apparently, whatever was about to happen next was up to him. Now, our story wouldn't be off to a very exciting start if the boy chose flight and ran away, going wee 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 all the way home. A funny start maybe, but not the most promising. Fortunately, although the boy had never really fought before, unless you count wrestling with his father over who gets the last ice cream sandwich, he made the bold, courageous, and life-changing decision to stand his ground. As he did, eyes beginning to water like a fountain, a jolt of adrenaline surged through him, convincing him he was making the right choice, and furthermore, that he wasn't going to waste this opportunity. For the brief space of a few seconds, he forgot that he was just a kid and that the guy charging toward him was likely extremely dangerous. The boy crouched low and picked up a wig that lay at his feet. Some poor barrister had obviously lost his hair, during all the commotion. Artificial hair braided with 2 pigtails in hand, the boy remained crouched, a leopard waiting for exactly the right moment to pounce upon his prey. The masked man closed quickly toward the boy and the green wall of fog behind him. 20 feet, 10 feet, 5, 0. Just as the man sprinted past, the boy sprung up and, clutching the hairpiece by the pigtails, looped the wig around the man's face and neck and wrapped his legs around the guy's midsection. Now the blind man bucked like a prize bronco in an attempt to shake his rider, but the boy gritted his teeth and clung to the pigtails, a rodeo rider holding fast to his horse's reins. Behind him, the police pulled up short of the fog wall through which horse and rider had just run. After a few moments of hushed conversation, during which it was agreed that the bad guy had released the green gas that formed the fog wall in order to keep people from seeing him unlawfully enter a judge's chambers and steal 4 of his robes, for reasons neither apparent nor important, the officers voted unanimously to resume their chase. Coming out of the pandemonium-filled side of the fog wall, the police saw the sightless man charge ahead in a zigzag pattern, hoping to shake the kid rider. What they didn't see, and had no way of knowing, was that the stinging sensation had returned to the boy's eyes with a vengeance. Moreover, the motion of the pigtails sliding up and down in his hands began to chafe his skin to the point where all the hand lotion in the world may not be enough to soften it again. These 2 factors made the boy realize that, like a toddler who just plunked his last penny into a coin-operated horse ride, his time in the saddle was rapidly coming to an end. The boy squinted through teary, bleary eyes. His vision called to mind looking out a window on a rainy day. Everything was blurry and pixelated, even the worms on the sidewalk. Yet through it all, he spotted a tall, bulky object up ahead that he prayed they'd reach before his grip gave out. Digging deep, he mustered the last of his energy and used it to walk his feet up the man's back, while at the same time tugging on the pigtails in a "whoa, pony" fashion. Though not schooled in psychology, let alone reverse psychology, the boy had an intuition that his demand that the man stop would only make him redouble his efforts not to. And now, all but standing on the man's shoulders, waving an imaginary cowboy hat in the air, the boy's intuition was rewarded by the man refusing to slow down. The young rider, now downright giddy, used the pigtail braids to steer the bronco left, right, left, and then wham! Right smack dab into the tall, bulky object. which turned out to be an 8-foot-tall bronze statue of the country's first High Chancellor that bore the phrase, "Justice never rests." The collision stopped the horse, aka the man, dead in his tracks. He staggered backwards one step and tipped to one side, already somewhere between unconsciousness and the outskirts of coma country. The boy let go of the wig and leapt off his mount so as not to be crushed by it when it hit the floor, which it soon did, and lay still as stones in a dried-up riverbed. After an instinctive tuck-and-roll landing, the boy found himself on his feet being mobbed by a very relieved public and 2 awestruck police officers. However, with his eyes watering so badly he felt as though his eyelids had turned into rain clouds, all the activity going on around him was little more than a blur. The sensation extended to the sounds surrounding him. It was like listening to a symphony underwater. Not that he had ever been to a symphony, nor could he imagine Fish playing the violin very well, let alone the kettle drums, but that was beside the point. The next thing he knew, his feet left the ground. The crowd was hoisting him up on their shoulders like the hero of a soccer match, or football match, depending where you live. As his hearing cleared, the sweet sounds of voices singing his praise touched his ears. Then the whole place erupted into applause. There was even a fair amount of whoop-whooping. Since he was pretty sure the king and queen hadn't just arrived, odds were very good that the ovation was for him. He smiled at the thought. Applause or no applause, reward or no reward, standing up to the bad guy had been the right decision. He rode the wave of hands until 2 sets of 5 strong fingers wrapped around his ankles and pulled him down through the outstretched arms until his feet were again planted on the floor. As the crowd continued cheering, a woman's voice whispered in his ear. "A token of my appreciation," she said, pressing something small, flat, and round into the boy's hand. The boy turned to thank her, but saw only a hint of the back of her white-haired head as she slipped through the mass of people and vanished from view. As he looked down to confirm that what she'd presented him was indeed a coin, the crowd parted and his father appeared, face glowing with admiration and maybe even astonishment. His son, the hero. The man picked him up and pulled him close for a warm fatherly hug and a hearty "attaboy." Happy that his father had found him and that his adventure was over, the boy slipped the item he thought was a coin into his pocket for further examination at a later time. That's when the cameras began to flash. Many hours, congratulations, and eye rinses later, the boy and his father returned home. An instant after the boy opened the car door, his mother grabbed hold of him and smothered him with motherly kisses. Then, immediately after telling him how very proud she was that he'd acted so heroically, she made him promise that he'd never be so daring again. Fortunately, just as he was beginning to think about the pros and cons of making such a promise, his father joined the duo, and the trio walked to the house with the boy recounting the harrowing events in nearly as much detail as described above. Over the course of a 3-course dinner that ended with a second helping of apple strudel for the boy, he realized that his mum had either forgotten about the promise or assumed he'd agreed to it without saying anything. Either way, after an hour in front of the telly watching his favorite show, the boy bid his parents good night and headed upstairs to his bedroom, a room as ordinary as any young boy could have. Pulling off his pants to make way for his pajamas, he heard the dull thunk of something striking the floor. He glanced down and saw that the object the woman had given him had fallen out of his pocket. It was a coin, he thought, scooping it up in one hand. However, upon closer inspection, he discovered that it wasn't exactly a coin. It was a token. "A token of my appreciation," he recalled. How clever. Into one side of the coin, someone had engraved SU-11. Curious. On the flip side, the boy saw a tiny hand giving a thumbs-up sign. Unless he was looking at it upside down, in which case it was really a thumbs-down sign. However, given the circumstance under which he'd been given it, he determined that it was indeed a thumbs-up. Up or down, the coin/token sure wasn't any currency he'd ever seen, and he doubted that the woman behind the counter at his favorite ice cream parlor would accept it in payment for his favorite treat. Slightly depressed, he pressed his thumb against the thumbs up sign, intending to rub away some of the grime. The moment the thumbs touched, the token glowed an emerald green. But before the boy could exclaim, "What in the world?" the token began to talk. Shocked though he was, the boy listened to every word the token, actually a man's gravelly voice coming through a teeny-tiny speaker inside the token, had to say. It didn't say much, just enough for the boy to know that this was the last time in his life he'd ever go to bed just an ordinary boy. Because his adventure wasn't over, it had just begun. 3 months ago, the boy ran, again. His mom and father had always told him that he was a fast runner, but he never knew if he should believe them. After all, when was the last time a father ever told his kid he was a slowpoke? And turtle dads don't count. With 3 of the biggest bullies ever to bully their way into Great Mitten City Park playground on his tail, the little boy knew that he was about to find out if his mother and father had told him the truth. If they had, he might survive the first day of summer break. If not, memories of finishing 3rd grade with top honors would be his last memory ever. It hardly seemed fair, but as one of the bullies had yelled at him right before giving chase 10 minutes ago, "Life isn't fair, now give me your backpack!" Of the boy's few prized possessions, the pack on his back was number 1. Not because it held any sentimental value or was expensive. His mum had bought it on sale at a store where the prices were already low to begin with, but because of what he'd recently stuck inside one of the side pockets. Not the tiny trophy he'd been given for earning top honors. Not the candy bar he'd been given for earning top honors. Not the picture of himself receiving the trophy in the candy bar from his headmaster for earning top honors. In fact, he'd accidentally dropped the picture in a mud puddle and stomped on it 6 times. What the pocket contained was at least 100 times more valuable than all those things added together, probably more like 1,000. It wasn't a ticket, not exactly, but it offered him a 1 in a million opportunity to pursue a passion he discovered that day in the courthouse, the one that earned him a token chance to become the person somehow he knew he was destined to be. "Last chance to give up before we pound you like a pound cake," the biggest bully cried from somewhere over and beyond the boy's shoulder. "Drop the pack and you live. Keep running and—" "I'm not running away," the little boy shouted without looking back. "I'm running toward." "Oh, really? Toward where?" "This." The boy sprang off his feet and threw his hands out in front of him. The combination of his speed and jumping height propelled him exactly the right distance to grab onto a tetherball hanging by its rope from the park's tetherball pole. The boy and tetherball arched around the pole, stopping momentarily slightly above the top of the pole, and began a quick, accelerating descent back to where the ball had started. The 3 bullies had neither the time nor the wits to consider what was about to happen. Consequently, it should come as no surprise that the next thing the biggest bully saw were the soles of the little boy's feet coming right at him. Wham! Both shoes clocked him right in the kisser. The big bully pitched backwards like a life-size domino into bully number 2, who took the impact square on the nose, which was as large as his brain was small. He too timbered backward, domino-like, into poor bully number 3, who soon found himself laying in the wood chips smothered by his bully buddies, neither of whom could be rightly described as slender. The little boy let go of the tetherball and raced away, not needing to look back to know that he'd scored a knockout. "Stop right there!" the biggest bully shouted as he struggled to his feet. The little boy kept right on running. "Last chance!" A tinge of doubt crept into the little boy's mind, but he didn't slow down. "SU-11!" The little boy hit the brakes harder than a race car driver headed for a brick wall. He skidded to a stop and swung around, but before he could say, "What did you say?" the biggest bully grabbed his own nose and yanked it straight down. Doing so revealed that it was actually a zipper slider that unzipped down the middle of his lip, over his chin, and down his neck. The unzipped face flopped to either side, leaving the owner's real face exposed. "You passed your final exam," the face said. Slip the token you have in your backpack to your beloved bus driver on the first day of school in the fall. The man to whom the face belonged motioned for his two companions to fall in line as he started off. "But," the little boy protested, "I thought FU11 kids didn't have to go to school." The man spoke without turning around. "Make sure you sit on the right side of the bus, in the row right behind the kid with his head down." By the time the little boy had committed the man's word to memory, the bullies in disguise had vanished from sight. And for the first time in the history of elementary school, there was a little boy who couldn't wait for summer break to be over.